There's a new Kill Team box, and in it there are brand new Night Lords models. Unfortunately, it reminds me of something I've been desperately trying to forget. How terrible my paint job is on my Night Lords army. Maybe we can fix it? 2 years ago, I had the brilliant idea of painting an entire 2,000 point Warhammer 40k army over the course of a week, painting only 2 hours a night. It's a terrible idea. Please do not do it, and the final paint quality of this army really proves that point. But today, it gives us an opportunity to figure out the how and the why I screwed this up so terribly, and seeing if we can fix it. All right, let's rip this Band-Aid right off. I had the vision of a grim, dark paint scheme for my Night Lords army, something that felt true to the faction, but unfortunately, I started off with the #1 error, and that is I didn't create a test model. Painting a test model is simply going through the entire process that you'd like your army to look like on one single figure. You're going to write down each of the steps as you do them so you know which order and which ones you really liked and which ones you wanted to tweak before you replicate it over the entire army. It's so important to see what the final product will be on one model before you replicate it over 60 plus models. And I just didn't do this. I just was overconfident in thinking that no matter what steps I took, the final product would look great. And it didn't. At all. One of the main benefits of a test model is the confidence that it gives you in each step that you're doing and how it's going to take you where you want to go once the whole process is complete. And if you have that confidence, it makes the entire army painting experience much more relaxing and fun. So we're going to take one of the 60 models in this army and turn it into a test model. And while we go through testing that out on screen, I'm going to talk about the specific things that I don't like about the paint job of the original army, and that'll give us an idea of how we want to fix them. First things first, these models are way too dark. Drama is created through contrast, and if everything is dark, it's kind of like nothing is dark. And I'm not saying that dark models can't look great on the tabletop, but they have to have some sharp jump in light or vibrancy to really punch out that darkness. The second main issue I have with the paint scheme here is kind of tied to the fact that they're too dark, and that's there's no main punch of color. No really signifying blue color to the midnight clad of these Night Lords. They're just way too desaturated all the way across the armor. I went back to the Conrad Kurz that I painted separately from this army to remind myself how cool the vibrant, vivid blue can look, even when contrasting with the dark overall feel that I want to have within the army. And because there's no main color punch in this army, the red OSL that I used just overpowers everything. I did a terrible job with it in general. It was the final step of the painting process, and I was so burnt out by painting this army at that time that I just didn't put the care or attention to detail in this step as I should have. So not only does the blue need to be built up across the models, I need to rein in that red so it's still present a little bit, but not overpowering like it is now. Next, the rust and weathering on these models is pretty lackluster, if I do say so. After all, these are Night Lords. They don't have the ability to make their own new suits of armor. They just scavenge off of whatever they can find. Yes, that was a bit of lore, and yes, I've read the books, and no, I am not proud of it. And the final thing that needs a bit of work on this army is just in general, it's kind of sloppy. There's not a lot of crisp edges and details that really define the shapes across the models so they really stand out at the table. I can tell that I just rushed my way through the army, and I know that it can be a big time sink to really develop all the edge highlighting across an entire army, and so we're not going to do exactly that, but we do need to boost this up a couple of levels in the detail department. As I'm working through this test model, I'm formulating a plan and how to approach the tackling of this entire army. Now, I am not going to be repainting anything. I'm using the previous paint job as a foundation. I'm building off of it. I'm leaning into the things that it already has that look fine, and I'm trying to boost up everything else. The last thing I'm going to do here is strip or start from scratch over anything. And as I'm formulating this plan, I'm doing something that I struggle with, but all responsible adults should be able to do, and that's make a list. Look, I'm not going to spend 100 hours on shining up this turd of an army. We're just beyond that point. But we can make a list of all the most impactful things we need to do in order to bring these junk Marines up to a point of respectability. One of the biggest benefits of making a list is you get to see it all in one place and determine which of those steps, things that you want to have done, are the most impactful and how much time each of those steps is going to take. Because when you're painting an army of 60 plus models, even what seems like a small step is going to take at minimum an hour of your time. So you want to be picky on what things make your list and the priority of that list. You can always make a second list of things that are still useful but maybe not top priority for you, and if you decide that you want to get to those because you're not burnt out on repainting the army yet, well then more power to you. And if you keep that approach up, soon enough you'll have a list of all your lists, and you can address which list upon your list of lists is the most important for what you want to do next. Now I've got the test model done, and there are certain steps that I don't exactly like, so I'm going to tweak them before I start on the entire other 59 models of this army. And the first thing we're going to address is that blue armor. Now, since we're dealing with already painted models, the thought of airbrushing does seem a bit nerve-wracking. Like, am I just going to overspray all these painted areas and just make it more messy or more work for myself just to clean it up? Yeah. Probably, but in order to make a big impact and really boost up this armor quickly, the airbrush is the right tool for the job. And I'm not going to be using the airbrush after this step, but this is going to save me so much more time in the long run if I use it now. Now that quick airbrushing step did not take much time, which is good because this next step is the most labor intensive of the entire army rework. And that is to do edge highlighting and defining shapes with that vibrant blue highlight color amongst all the blue armor. And I'm not worried about hitting every single edge and corner here. I'm just worrying about the most visible details I'd see from the tabletop. I'm mostly focusing on the upward facing edges and corners on the top half of each model. Now, one factor that can make or break this step in your sanity in trying to achieve it is having a paint that will give you this nice, crisp, opaque color in just one coat. So I thought I was going to be real smart and tricky and use this vibrant scale color artist range blue because it's a thick tube paint, and obviously this thing was going to cover much better than the army painter paint I used to the airbrush, right? No, actually it didn't. I needed to thin this paint out of the tube enough to make it workable with a brush, and at that point the Fanatics blue was actually more opaque and easier to use. So note to self. Today's video is brought to us by Into the AM. You know, it's convenient when they sponsor a video because I'm wearing the shirts pretty much every day anyway, so I don't have to change to record the ad. We've all had buyer's remorse before, and it's especially painful when it comes to clothing. Why can't a company just make a shirt that's comfy, that's not itchy, and that doesn't break down and fade away in the wash? I'm sick of dealing with all that, which is why I just stick with Into the AM. They've got a ton of great and weird designs. They're super comfy and fit super well, much better than all the cheap t-shirts in my closet, and they hold out really well even after going through the wash a ton of times. Also, they just had another big drop of new t-shirt designs on the website, and I love that every time I check out their site, there's something cool and new that I haven't seen before. They've got great bundle deal pricing if you want to buy 3 shirts or more. Plus, you can use code NINJON at checkout to get an additional 10% off everything you buy. So pause the video, click on the link down in the video description, pick up a couple of sweet new shirts to breathe some life into your wardrobe, and then come on back and see if we can't save this army. Now, when I'm painting armies, I like to alternate my steps between something that is tedious and takes a long time, like the armor edge highlighting that we just did, with something that's quick and pretty brainless and pretty fun to just slop across the model. Which is why my next step is going to be to use a black wash over select areas of the models. There's a good amount of details already painted on these models that need a darker definition. I'm avoiding all of the blue armor that we just painted, but a lot of the metallics and the details on the helmets take a black wash really, really well, and they give us that extra level of depth with this crisp black lining without any need for future steps to build back up those details with highlights. Also, this wash is good in certain areas where I've pushed the OSL red too much and kind of bring it back in so we can rework it later. You know, when I mentioned that there are certain parts of these models that just look sloppy or unfinished, all the black casings on the guns are a great example of it. It just looks like I didn't go back and put in any other work besides the base coat, because I didn't. So I'm just using a mid-tone gray and trying to catch some edge highlights wherever I can on these guns to define the shapes and make them look like they're an actual finished model. Next, I want to spend some time upgrading some of this gold trim on these models. This really is a highlight of the models, and it looks pretty flat and lame. For a couple reasons I'm doing this. First of all, there's a product. The Army Painter Speed Paint Gold range is amazing, and it'll be super quick for me to upgrade the highlights of this gold armor in just one coat. It's important to note that the last thing I'm going to do is repaint all of the stupid metallic trim on these Chaos Marines. Seriously, when I originally painted all this gold trim on this army, it was probably the most miserable experience I've ever had in miniature painting. Also, this gold makes really easy work of cleaning up any of the areas of overspray I made with the blue airbrush step in just one coat. This boosts our definition of our different surfaces while still keeping the dark and weathered shadowy areas of the metallics from the original paint job untouched. Now, there's a fair bit of bones and skulls across this entire army because Warhammer, but they seem to be pretty rough in the paint job I originally did. So I'm going to pull them together with a nice sepia wash and then come back in with a pale sand to give us a nice bright punchy pop to the highlights of each of these bones. All right, back to metallics, and we're going to focus on the silvers. Now, I originally did an enamel wash all over much of these models in the original paint job, and that just kind of pulled everything together, and it doesn't look as shiny and bright in certain areas as I'd like, so we need to touch that up a little bit. I prefer to use a pure chrome paint for this step, the brightest silver you own, and I'm using it sparingly so it just gives that feel that an older eroded metal has little chips in it where that pure silver is peeking through. This is one of those steps that really reminds me that the amount of time any particular step takes does not equate to how important it is for the final impact of the model or the army. This step is one of the quickest in the entire process, but it makes such a big impact. It brings to life the brightest shiny points, and it really sells the depth across the entire model. One of the most egregious areas of the original paint job was how the red that I sprayed through an airbrush blew out all of the skin areas on some of the models. Now, they have a nice, cool, sickly greenish skin tone on them, but you can't really see it because of all that red. So I'm going to go back through with deep kin flesh and boost up the brightness, the sickliness, the highlights of that skin and flesh as much as I can. And while doing this, I'm actually covering up a bunch of that red while still a faint haze of it is there to give us the cool color depth that we're looking for. All right, we're in the final stretch here, which means I had to spend some time painting eyeballs. Joy. It's no secret that the human eye is drawn to the face of anything we look at if it has a face. So having a bright, punchy eye really makes up for the fact that you had some things that don't look so great across the model because the eyes and the face look pretty good. After hitting every eye with pure white, we go back with the most vibrant red in my collection. The white undercoat will ensure that that red has maximum vibrancy and punch in just one layer. Plus, if you're feeling up to it and have a steady hand, you can leave a bit of that white still present in the corner to give the effect of a reflection from the lens or the eye itself. I like to save the steps that are really going to push the models over the top for the end, and that means the weathering and the lightning bolts on our Night Lords. So we're going to start with magic in a bottle, and that's Dirty Down Rust. This stuff gives us a nice matte, orangish, irregular shapes and coloration on the models, and this really, really contrasts well with the blue armor. Now, one trick with this stuff is start small. Use a little bit of it in logical places where the rust would collect and grow on the models. You can always add more later, but always start little and work your way up. Since my hand was in the dirty down drawer, I grabbed the moss as well. This stuff looks great across the bases of the model. Looks like some kind of alien fungal growth or something. It's a little bit of color interest in next to no time. Now for the lightning bolts, I'm using Pro Acryl's Bold Titanium White because this stuff is super opaque and it flows really easily off the tip of my brush, which is really important when I want to create these really thin, jagged, scratchy lines to emulate lightning bolts with just one layer. Now, I did have a fun little unexpected result here. Because I had airbrushed over the previous lightning bolts, you can still see a bit of them underneath there. And this almost acts like a reflection, a shadow, or something off in the distance that there's other lightning bolts. It adds some depth to the armor underneath the white lightning bolts that I'm painting right now, which honestly is super cool. And it would be something that I try to emulate in future paint jobs if I want to do this again. And our final step is to, of course, give the battle gore. And I use Dry Blood by the Army Painter. I use a little sponge, and I like to use a tweezers to hold the sponge and apply this all over the weapons, all over the claws, over ever random other areas you want to be bloody. Blood is kind of like butter. It just makes everything better. And with that, I have what I consider to be the most vital steps to upgrade this army's paint job complete. And I did jot down a handful of additional steps that I could still do to improve the army, but this process took me 4 days to complete, and I'm a little bit burnt out on it for now, but it feels good that I have other things I could do, but it looks so much better than it did before I started. What I realized through this process is that it's not all that difficult to take any of your old armies and boost them up from their current state. You don't need to repaint them. You don't need to strip them. You just need to take what's there and build off of it to give you a great looking upgraded paint job. So I went from really disliking my work on the paint job of this army to really being pretty happy with it. It's surprising how much this doesn't even look like the same army anymore. And it got me thinking, what if about every year or so, I went through each of my armies and just did 1 or 2 steps of upgrades? It feels like constant evolution improvement off of armies we've already painted is a lot more achievable of a goal than starting from scratch all the time. A big thanks for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate you watching, subscribing, using my links down below to buy your hobby goodies at a discount. That supports me, as does joining me on Patreon, where we got some fun rewards. And those patrons, I can't thank enough. You're the ones that allow me to keep making these fun videos. And speaking of new videos, I'll be back with another one before you know it. And sometime between now and then, make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray. And edge highlighting with that bright blue vibrant color. Fuck me, that's too many words. To give that impression of pure lightning bolts. Fuck me, why did I say pure lightning bolts? Like something might be like 30% lightning bolt? No, this lightning bolt is pure. It's all lightning. No additives, colors, and preservatives in these lightning bolts.